the second choice I made was to commit to a two-way agreement. And now for me, when I think about a two-way agreement, and this was a two-way agreement between me and my sister way back when I think about a two-way agreement, I think about the construct of two people or two entities coming together to give and to receive with a like-minded objective of bringing each other up. You know, like we're in this together. There's boundaries and we're in this together. When I did commit to that agreement for the first time, for me, that commitment fueled my transformation from I have to do these things to I want to do these things. And that really directed a lot of my choices then moving forward. So when I think about two-way agreements, we enter into them all the time. Mm-hmm. What's a two-way agreement that just one of the two-way agreements that you've entered into? And just tell me about it.
One, I probably got into a little bit already, but I'd say there's really two answers to that. One is what I just described with Terry and I. I mean, that was kind of an unscripted two-way agreement that we had to figure out over time how that was going to work. You know, what are the expectations? What are the rules of the road? I think at the beginning, you know, we thought maybe it would be for a year, but we both could tell it was working well. So we made another agreement that we would continue to do that. And there were still people that would be like asking Terry all the time or asking us, oh, so is Terry going to go back to work and you're going to stay home? I'm like, no, this is working great. But, you know, we had to figure out the roles of how to think about, you know, parenting, and especially as you go through the many ages of kids, right? So there was a lot of continual two-way agreement, I think, in our marriage, especially with our unique situation with Terry staying home, me with the kids. The other two-way agreement, okay, this might not be a fair answer, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Give it to me.
Is with myself. Is the two selves of myself, because you know there is when you get caught up in a career that, you know, again, the flip side of ambition and drive could be that becomes your sole focus. And I'm competitive, so it can be pretty easy to get into a world where you're focused only on how fast can I progress, or how far can I make it, or do I look, you know, am I the person that looks like they're going to be whatever. So I literally had to make a deep agreement with myself that I would never trade off being the best mother or partner I could be, as well as driving my career. And so there were times that I took risk in my life to say, okay, like maybe at a certain time in the 80s, right, when FaceTime in the office was all important, you know,
yes,
like I would say, you know, I was competing with people that maybe I had my first child when I was 29. So I was 29 when I had Jack. And that was in that world young. You know, most of my peers thought that was like, you know, the fact that I got married at 23, people thought that was really kooky, right? So I was living kind of a parallel life, or a different life than others from the start, at least in my business career, where most people were getting married later and having families later. So people that could stay at work till 7 o'clock at night. And I made an agreement with myself that I was going to create my own rules. And if it didn't work, then it's not going to work. And so that would be things like, you know, yes, I'm leaving at 5 o'clock, or I'm leaving at 5:30 or whatever. I'd be home if I wasn't traveling, trying to be home every night. I mean, the kids still remember walking down the street when I was getting off the 6:15 train, meeting me on their little bikes and stuff. And then everything that was in my brain that was stressing me out from the day, because let's face it, everybody has stressful days in their career. I would literally try to open a little door in the back of my brain and put it in there and close the door for the night, because, or at least for a few hours, okay? Because bringing my baggage in about what might have ticked me off that day or what was on my mind that was hard, first of all, it wasn't helpful and wasn't relevant to Terry or to anybody else in that household at the time, right? Because they're like, whatever, you're just home. So I made an agreement with myself to just have the backbone to do what I thought I needed to do to be good at both, or as good at both as I could be. Now, you know, I often then would, you know, we'd go through the dinner routine and the bath time routine, everybody's in bed, and then quite often I would then fire up the laptop and be working, you know, from 9 to 11 or something. It came in handy that I needed like 6 hours of sleep a night for a lot of my life. So that came in handy. Wouldn't recommend it for everybody. I also made an agreement. I tried really hard not to send emails to people that time of night. But I figured out a long time ago how to save them as drafts and send them or schedule them to go the next day. So the other part of that agreement was to not impose on other people just because this works for me. And I've really tried, you know, throughout my career, for anybody working for me to try to meet them wherever they are. And in fact, I'd say post, you know, COVID, I mean, listen, I was job sharing, I was telecommuting, I was working part-time. I've done so many things 30 years ago that now are relevant again. And I think that's the way to get the best out of everybody is if somebody's productive and they're delivering the goods, but let them flex their lives to meet their needs. But that was something I had to agree with myself to do and keep
Oh my
myself.
gosh.
You
I
know?
mean, it is, I mean, and the agreement with yourself, with myself, I mean, I feel like that's the agreement that I let fall
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
often.
and when I would travel, like, especially at McDonald's, I'd be traveling,
Yeah.
world cities around the world,
Internationally.
but I would never stay an extra day. I mean, I would love to stay a couple days in Paris. Yeah. I'd like to run. So best way for me to see a city when I was traveling is get up in the morning and run and see like wonderful cities,
Mhm.
but just get home. And Trish, you'll appreciate this because so often people ask women executives questions that they don't ask men ever, hardly
Yep.
ever, about like what's like being a working mom. And did you feel guilty and questions that are put on women. But at one point I asked one of my daughters, Maggie, when she was in her early 20s and very wise, and I just, hey, let me ask you a few questions about what it was like for you. And she's like, what do you mean? I go, well, growing up and your mom was working, your dad was home. She's like, okay. I was like, I was traveling a lot, sometimes leaving on
Mhm.
a Sunday night. She's like, wait, stop, hold the presses. Why are you asking me these things? Because it seems like you're here all the time. Like, why is this question in your head? I was like, well, that's a gift. And I look back and that was a two-way agreement I made to myself. I didn't know that it would possibly end up with my kids feeling like this is normal, nothing to look at here. This is great. But I'm glad I did. I'm glad I made that agreement because it was me
Yeah.
having to work a lot to make that work.
Yeah. And you fueled that agreement.
Yeah,
You did it.
I tried the best I could.
Yeah. I remember you telling me that story about Maggie because I've never traveled internationally, but through my
Yeah,
career, I was on the pre-COVID, I was on the road all the time. Remember, I used to go to San Diego all the time, Boston to
yeah,
San Diego. I was like, oh, my kids are always going to think I'm gone. I'm never there on picture day. Joe's always sending me a picture of picture day. And you told me that story, and I've kept that in my mind because I do believe that Lily and Sam will
yeah.
remember how
Well, and now that
proud
they're
I
getting
am.
older, you can see how
Yeah.
they're proud of what you've done and what you do. And this is just kind of normal for them. But I think unfortunately it's a tape that gets played
Mm.
about women and motherhood and working that we have to just kind of push aside, I think.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Choose and Become interview series. To check out more episodes, go to www.trishkendall.com/podcast. Or go to any of your favorite podcast channels, including YouTube, under Trish Kendall Speaks, and you'll find this interview and more. Choose and become.